Okay guys, so I had a look in the Dropboxes there over the weekend just to kind of get a feel for who was on top of things and who wasn't. And to be honest, I didn't get much information. It was fairly clear that people just aren't updating the Dropboxes, because I saw a lot more stuff in labs than I saw in the Dropboxes. So I didn't really get the information I wanted from that. I'd hoped to see what people had done so far and to give them feedback, and also identify people maybe who were struggling, and then I could, you know, home in on those people a bit when I see them next, just to make sure they get sorted. But I didn't really get that information from the Dropboxes, so I don't know if that's going to work out or not. The issue really is that if you're doing fine, then you don't really benefit much from uploading your stuff to the Dropbox on a regular basis and letting me see that. The benefit is to the people that are struggling that don't have anything to update. But I can't tell the difference between those people and the people that just aren't updating. So we'll see. We'll hang on to those Dropboxes anyway, because you'll probably use them as your main assignment submission method. So we'll keep them anyway, but I don't know, if people aren't going to upload the stuff, then it doesn't really work. So I'll have another look in a while and see, just pop in and pop out. For people that had uploaded stuff and had made mistakes or things, or had misunderstood something, they would have got feedback there. I made a sort of a spreadsheet just using people's initials, just so you know, I left little comments. So there's a link to that on the blog. So we see, it's not a big deal. If you want to do that, it helps. If you don't, I mean, there's no marks going for anything. What we're going to start looking at today.
Sorry,
yes?
I don't get is if I'm trying something and I'm kind of stuck, I couldn't. I have to put it there to get some kind of help, or I have to finish it before. It's like I start.
Well, it's just an alternative. I mean, if you don't catch me in the lab, for example, you could upload it and email me, and then I could go have a look. But it's better, obviously, if I help you in the lab. But I'm saying there's some people, it's not that what they have isn't working. Some people have nothing done yet. And I need to identify those people and make sure they get, you know, back on board. I mean, if you're stuck on something and it's not working, the best way to fix it is to, you know, shout at me in the labs and I'll come help you out. That's the best way. But that doesn't always work. I mean, if you have your lab on a Monday or something, and you know you're not going to see me again for another week, and you're in a hurry, I mean, maybe you can upload it to the Dropbox and send me an email, and I can go have a look, and maybe I can spot what's wrong. You know, but mostly the thing I wanted was just people, as they were doing their work, to upload it there so I could see how they were doing. The most common thing that will happen if people do use the Dropbox is people will think they're done when they're not. And I might see that. So you might think you're finished something, I might look at it, I might test it, and I might find there's something wrong with it and let you know. So that's probably a very likely outcome. But in terms of if you're stuck, the way to go about that really is to sort that out in the labs. No, any other questions? So what we're going to look at today, we're going to start looking at is the subject of cookies. So we'll leave all that input validation stuff aside for now. I would propose that you carry on coding that, but I don't think there's much more to be said about it, just apart from you going away and actually doing it. I don't think I can talk anymore about it. So I'm going to talk about cookies today, and I would propose that you not go coding cookies until all of the other stuff is done. And cookies are messy enough to code. It's just they're a bit fiddly, but they're very, very powerful and very useful. And they're one of the major things that JavaScript can do as well. So you can't really do a JavaScript course and not deal with cookies. So let me just stand here so I can see my screen as well. So cookies are small little bits of information that are stored in the user's browser. Now that's a very important piece of information there. They're stored in the user's browser. So sometimes when you go to a website and it appears to be remembering you, it is remembering you, but the memory is in your browser, not on the server. That's an important distinction. So the cookies are stored in your browser. So if you switch browsers, for example, the cookies will not be there. There was a time when Ryanair was, the more you looked at the flight, the more the price went up. And it was storing the flights you were looking at. So eventually figured out what day you wanted, what flights you wanted to buy. You had to open up another browser where there weren't cookies stored, and then you get the best price. So the cookies are stored in the browser, in your browser. So you have control over them, for the most part. So if the browser then returns to the server in the future, the server can read the information in that cookie. So it'll recognize you as having been there before. So let's say before the corporation stopped doing bins, there was a website where you could go and check what day was recycling and what day was bins for your area. So I don't know, let's say the city was split up into, I don't know, 16 different zones or something. And let's say Bishopstown, let's say my street in Bishopstown was like zone B or something, right? Well, you go to the website and it says, so where are you? You click through and you might eventually find, okay, I'm in zone B. And then it tells me, well, today's bins and next Monday's recycling. Now, it would be very, very useful if the next time I went back to see when was the next bin day, when was the next recycling day, when was the next glass day, whatever, if it remembered that the person using that browser was in zone B. So it said, well, if you're in Bishopstown, then you're in zone B, and you know, today's bin day. You could do that with a cookie. You could save in the person's browser that their bin zone is B. And then the next time they go back to the corporation website, it could say, okay, is there anything there about what zone they're in? Oh yeah, you're in zone B. Okay, well, I'll default then to the information for zone B. Now, if you've moved house or whatever, you know, you can click through and figure out what zone you're in now. But the default information would be zone B. Wouldn't it be great if every time you went to the CIT website, the timetables, it went straight to your timetable, and then, you know, if you wanted someone else, you could say maybe like, click here for other timetables. Because let's face it, every time you go to the CIT website, you only want one timetable. I'm going to suggest that to them, actually, because from a student's point of view, that makes complete sense. But people working in CIT, of course, are dealing with lots of timetables all the time. But that would actually be an interesting thing to do. I digress. Now, so you can store information in the person's browser, and when they come back to the website, you can pick that up again and do something with it. So the most common thing you do is you store some sort of identifier explaining who they are. And so then when they come back to the website, it's like, welcome back, Colin. You know, how are you? You have to be careful, of course, not to freak people out. You know, how's the notes me? You know, so you can't be too, you know, try not to weird people out. But from the technical point of view, all you're doing is you're storing a piece of information in the user's browser. And when they come back, you can look and see if it's there. So you can recognize, you know, previous visitors. If you're doing some very complicated programming, you can also actually use them as a variable store. Because if you have one page and then you go to another page, like the JavaScript is only on the one page. If your JavaScript takes you to another page, that's fine. But suppose there's some information in variables that the other page needs. Well, you can use cookies to do that if you're really stuck. That's a bit ugly, but you can do that. Now, creating a cookie is very easy. It's getting stuff out again is hard. So you'd say document.cookie, and then you'd say is assigned something like name equals Martin. Or you could say document.cookie is assigned phone equals 08799912334. And so the browser then will store that in its little cookie store. I like to call it a cookie jar. Okay, so there's a little cookie jar string there that stores all of the cookies. And it just slaps them in there in a big long string, and it separates them with a semicolon. Because it uses the semicolons as separators, things like semicolons and commas and spaces, you can't really put them in the data on the cookie because it could screw up. So if it's someone's phone number, for example, you should make sure that it's 087 and no space. You know, so just 087999123. Yes, sir.
If you're storing a string,
Mm-hmm.
like the name is Martin, what if you were to put like a double quote around Martin there, would that create any kind of error? Like,
You would have to escape the quote that you want to be as part of the quote. If you want to quote a quote, you have to escape it. So you could do that.
is that Martin treated as a string?
Yes, that's all a string. So the cookie jar string, as I call it, would have name equals Martin semicolon phone equals 08799912334. Semicolon, hopefully. So you can't put semicolons or commas or things inside in your data, or it can screw up. But there is a function in JavaScript called escape that you can use for that, where you pass in your string with spaces and semicolons, whatever, into this escape function. It makes it, you know, in a different format, and then you can unescape that later if you want. Now, for what you're doing, I think you probably won't need that for anything you're doing with cookies. If you do end up using spaces, though, you might need to use the escape and unescape, and you can look that up. So, you know, if address is 123 Rossa Avenue, I mean, you'd have to have spaces in there. So you would need it for something like that. But don't get hung up on that. So you say document.cookie, and then you have is assigned, and then in quotes, name equals Martin. So name is the name of the cookie, and then Martin is what it stores. Phone is the name of the cookie, and then 08799912334 is what it stores. Unfortunately, in the naming, in the terminology, we don't have a name then for the string that stores them all. So I call that the cookie jar, like I said, but that's just me. Reading cookies then is a pain in the arse. Okay? So document.cookie is the string then that holds all of the cookies that you have. Now, you don't know how many you have, you don't know what they are, although presumably if you wrote them, you'd expect them to be there. But you don't know what they hold. You don't necessarily know what order they're in or anything. So we need to parse that string then to extract the data out of it. These are actually, I was going to say I will put these on the blog, but actually this is one of the few occasions when it's already there in advance, so you needn't worry about too much about taking everything down. You just take down the important points. But that's up to you. So let's presume that we have in here a phone number. So we have in here, we've saved PHONE equals something. So we know then that in this cookie string, there's a piece of information in there somewhere. We know there's a string, a substring called PHONE equals, and we want to find that. So what I'll do is actually, I'll talk you through it bit by bit, okay? We'll come back to that. That in more detail anyway. Now, in the early days of cookies, if I went to one website and it had information about me, and it stored that in the cookie, I could go along to another website, and you get some websites that would sniff around for any cookies at all they could find. And so, to try and get information about you. If for example, you were on a website that was thick enough to store your credit card details as a cookie, I mean, they might have thought, well, that's no harm. Sure, it's on the user's browser anyway. Do you know what I mean? I don't have it. They have it. You know, they had it before. They still have it. What's the big deal? But the problem was that they could go to another website, and that website would sniff around, hoover up all the cookies it could find, and then they'd have that information too, when maybe they shouldn't have had. So that was a problem in the early days of cookies. But the browsers are smarter now, and they will only give up a cookie to the site that wrote it in the first place. So if I go to Amazon.com and it stores, and it recognizes that, you know, that's Colin there, and it has, you know, Colin Manning. If I go to, God, it's hard now, you can only remember one website, you know. If I go to, you know, ESB.com, it can't see that it's Colin Manning. It can only see the cookies it wrote. That's a security feature. Now, in fact, it can only, because you may have many different sites on the one domain even, potentially. The cookies can only be read by the page that wrote it, pages that are in the same folder as the page that wrote it, or the pages, that folder's children. Do you know what I mean? So you have to be under it or beside it. Because you could imagine a scenario, for example, where between you all chip in and get a domain name, and you all have your own individual websites in there, but they could be completely separate. So you won't encounter this really, because you'll just be in the one, you know, spot. But if you're building a website, the cookies can only be read by the page that wrote it, its brothers, its siblings, and then pages in the folder underneath it. Which makes sense. You couldn't. It's hard to imagine that someone else would have any business with it. So that was a big problem in the early days, and it was sort of a forerunner of the whole cookies privacy problem that we have. Because, of course, companies love cookies because you can use them to keep track of where your users are going on your website, for example. But cookies can also be used now to track people from site to site. And maybe so you go to a site and you think you're there, you know, as a random visitor, totally anonymously, when they know who you are because of some cookie information that was left over somewhere. But that's really a separate issue. We're not going to deal with that now. Cookies can expire. So you can write a cookie and it will last only for the length of the session. So on the web page, when you close the browser, you've gone away, it's gone. Which is really only useful if you're using the cookies as a variable store. But for the most part, if you're using cookies, you want to remember the person for some period of time. So you can specify the time in the future at which the cookie will expire. If you're doing anything for this class, you might as well make the time it expires, you know, July or something, because you won't be wanting it beyond that, hopefully. And if you do, well, the expiry date of your cookies will be the least of your problems. Now, so you can create a date object here. Remember I was saying that in JavaScript, all of the, most of the ordinal types start at 0. So month 6 is actually July, because January is month 0. So that can be a bit confusing. So here we're creating a new date object, and then we're just converting it to a standard format. So then when you write the cookie, when you add the cookie to the cookie jar, when you say document.cookie equals whatever, you must put in semicolon expires plus the date string. And so then that cookie will last until that date. And beyond that date, it'll be gone. So the default lifespan of the cookie is the browser session. But you can extend that if you want. Now, although the format looks for a specific date, what most people are talking about, though, is they're saying, well, I want it to expire in 60 days' time or whatever. So you might have to write a bit of code to find, today's date, add 60 days to it, and then slap that in. Any questions on that much so far? So we're still really only writing cookies. We haven't really read them. Yeah?
If you were continuing the document of cookie there, like at the end where it expires and then it ends the code and adds the date.
Yeah.
How would you add more to that cookie? Would you have to put in quotes again?
No. Well, you wouldn't probably write more than one cookie at a time. So the next thing then, let's say you want the phone number. You'd say document.cookie is assigned phone equals 087 blah 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 plus expires equals whatever. It's important to note that when you say document.cookie is assigned whatever, it'll add that to whatever's there already.
Oh, okay.
I didn't make that clear. From the syntax, you would think it would just have one big string and you can write it and change it and do what you like. Are you saying, Lee?
I was saying, why isn't it plus equals? Because it's kind of breaking its own rules now, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But there you go. That's JavaScript for you. It is a bit confusing. You would think that by the time you were done with this piece of code there, that document.cookie, that it would hold just name. But it holds whatever was there before as well. Now, if there was name there before, and you're overwriting that, well, then it'll do that. Yes?
What was that UTC format?
That's just a standard format for date and time. So the date object is stored internally in some JavaScripty way. If you want to actually output that then you can convert it to this particular format using that function. So we saw IndexOf in that handout about the checksums. And here it is again now. So just to recap, what IndexOf does is you pass in a substring and it'll find the location of that substring in a larger string. So it'll evaluate to the position of it. And if you give it a second parameter, you can start your search in a particular spot. So if my string was Cork Institute of Technology, then my string IndexOf lowercase o 5 will come back with 15. And not 10 as it says on the handout, by the way. So most of you have seen that already now and used it in anger. Any questions? So we need this to fish out the bits of information that we're looking for. So if this is our cookie and we're trying to extract the phone number from it, we know we've got possibly some stuff and then phone equals 087 and the number, followed by a semicolon, possibly followed by some stuff. That's pretty much all we know. That's even assuming it's in there. We're not even sure it's in there, but that's another day's work. So we know in there somewhere is phone equals. And so we look for that phone equals using the index of. So this is saying int location equals string cookie dot index of phone equals. Now it has to be phone equals, just on the off chance that someone was called phone, or there was some information phone in there, right? Phone equals is the name of the cookie that we're looking for. So that will come back with this variable here that I call int location. So now we know where the phone equals thing starts. This means then that the phone number must start in there. And we know it's 6 positions on, we know it's 6 characters on because it's PHONE equals. So plus 6. That's where the 6 comes from. So we found phone equals, that we got the location of that. Now we have the location that's the start of the phone number. Now if we were confident it was a particular length, we probably have everything we need. We could just whip that out there. But let's say we're not confident of the length, because in general we won't be. Phone numbers, okay, might be a fixed length, but names could be a variable lengths. Now we need to find the semicolon that comes after that. So the next semicolon after that will mark the end of the phone number. So we do int end equals string cookie.indexOf semicolon, and we start looking for the semicolon at position int start. Okay? So now we know then the start position of the phone number and the end position of the phone number, and we can use a substring to fish it out. Any questions on that? So in general, that's how we read a cookie. Now there are some complications that we can deal with. So you find the start position of the thing you're looking for. Then you jump ahead how many long that is. So if it was name, N-A-M-E equals is only 5. So you might search for name equals and then add 5 to that and then start looking for the semicolon from there. Yes?
When you're storing the string index of, is that stored in a particular variable, like is that number that is stored in int location? What is that number though?
I don't understand your question, no. Sorry.
I was trying to think of it a different way rather than having like exact like 6 or something in there, like could you use a different variable? That's what I was thinking.
Instead of 6,
Well, like, you know, like is there, I don't know what it is. Yeah. Never mind, it's okay.
any other questions? Any questions on that? No. Yes, sir.
Document.cookie stores everything.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's going to get very complicated very quickly if you have a lot of information in there. Just to write all that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, eventually what you do is you'd write an all singing, all dancing generic cookie reading function where you pass in the name of the thing you want. You can see how it wouldn't be a big deal to to write a function, pass in a parameter that's the name of the cookie you're looking for. But yeah, it does get messy. Cookies are very messy. You would think if they'd gone to the trouble of writing a function, if it was so easy to put them in, you'd think they'd have made it easier to get them out. Any questions? I'm not going to go on from this. I want people to digest this, and then we'll deal with the complications the next time. Just want you to visualize that. Any questions? Okay, I'll put a little video on the blog as well. Just does the same thing, but might help. So you need to be able to visualize that and imagine what's going on. So you're finding if it's the phone number, you're looking for the phone that equals. When you know where that starts, then you know where the phone number starts. So you have that point, and then you're looking for the next semicolon after that, and that gives you the end. Interestingly, because of the oh, I'm going to go into it. Doesn't matter. No, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, we are taking just the phone number.
Yeah.
Something else after that is not going to.
We're just looking for the phone number there. Yeah. If we were looking for the name, we'd have to have different code to find the name. But I'm saying we know there's a phone number in there somewhere. We don't know what's before it, what's after it, but we know there's a phone equals something there. We want to find that. And we know it starts with phone equals, and we know it ends with a semicolon. And that's all we know. So we find the phone equals, jump past that, that's our start point, and then we look for the next semicolon, and then we have the beginning and the end. And we can lift that out and plonk it into our variable. Questions? Okay, so we'll let that sink in, and I'll deal with some complications the next time.